The lighthouse keepers who vanished on a small, isolated island off the western coast of Scotland, where the Atlantic never rests and the wind seems to howl with intent. 3 men vanished without a trace. No bodies were found, no signs of struggle, no cries for help carried across the water, only silence. The island was called Eilean Mòr, the largest of the Flannan Isles, a cluster of jagged rock rising sharply from a cold, unforgiving sea. To sailors, it was a place of danger. To lighthouse keepers, it was duty. And to most people, it was a place never meant for human life at all. On most days, the island felt abandoned by the world. Grass bent low under relentless winds. Waves slammed into the cliffs with enough force to shake the ground. Seabirds circled overhead, their cries cutting through the fog like warnings. And standing alone above it all was the lighthouse, tall, pale, and unblinking, its beams sweeping endlessly across the dark water, night after night. In December of 1900, that light was entrusted to 3 men: James Ducat, the principal keeper, Thomas Marshall, his assistant, and Donald MacArthur, the relief keeper. They were not novices. They were not dreamers chasing adventure. They were experienced professionals, men who had faced storms strong enough to tear iron from stone, men who understood isolation, routine, and risk. Loneliness was part of the job. Fear was not. Their days followed a strict rhythm. Lamps were cleaned, logs were written, weather was recorded with careful precision. Meals were eaten together in the small stone quarters beneath the tower. At night, the light burned steadily, guiding ships safely past the deadly rocks below. Nothing in their records suggested panic. Nothing hinted at conflict. Nothing implied that this assignment would be their last. And yet, just days after Christmas, something went terribly wrong. The light failed. For passing ships, it was an alarming sight. A lighthouse meant to burn continuously had gone dark. The sea, already treacherous, had become even more dangerous. Reports were sent, questions were asked, and finally a supply vessel was dispatched to investigate. As it approached Eilean Mòr, the crew noticed something deeply unsettling. There was no welcome signal, no movement on the cliffs, no figure waiting by the landing. The lighthouse stood silent against the gray sky. When the crew set foot on the island, they felt it immediately, an unnatural stillness, as if the place itself were holding its breath. The wind still blew, the waves still crashed, but something was wrong. The men who were supposed to be there were gone, and whatever had happened to them had left no clear explanation behind. This is the story of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers, and one of the most unsettling disappearances in maritime history. The island. Far out in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the familiar routes of ferries and fishing boats, lies a place that feels detached from time itself. The Flannan Isles are not a single island, but a scattered group of rocky outcrops rising abruptly from the sea, roughly 20 miles west of the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. On most maps, they appear insignificant, mere dots swallowed by blue. But to those who have stood near them, even briefly, the Flannans feel immense, heavy with presence, as if they resist being observed. There are no trees here, no harbors, no villages, only stone, wind, and water. The largest of these islands is Eilean Mòr, its name meaning big island in Gaelic, though big is a relative term. What Eilean Mòr truly offers is not size, but hostility. Its cliffs rise steeply from the sea, dark and jagged, scarred by centuries of relentless waves. In many places, the rock face drops straight down into churning water, leaving almost no safe place to land. Even in calm weather, approaching the island is a calculated risk. In a storm, it becomes an act of defiance. The sea around the Flannans is notoriously unpredictable. Strong currents collide beneath the surface, while sudden squalls can roll in without warning. Fog is frequent and thick, swallowing ships whole and reducing visibility to almost nothing. For sailors navigating these waters in the 19th century, the islands were a death sentence, waiting patiently beneath the waves. That is why the lighthouse was built. Completed in 1899, the Eilean Mòr Lighthouse was designed not for comfort, but for survival. It stood high on the island's western edge, where it could project its beam far across the Atlantic approaches. Its pale stone tower rose starkly against the dark rock, visible for miles on a clear day, and desperately needed on the nights when storms erased the horizon entirely. Inside, Everything was functional, Spartan, unforgiving. The lighthouse complex included the tower itself, a small living quarters, storage rooms, and a narrow path carved into the rock leading down toward a precarious landing area. There were no luxuries, no distractions. Life here revolved around maintenance, precision, and routine, and isolation. Once the supply boat departed, the keepers were alone, completely and undeniably so. There were no neighboring lights to signal to, no nearby settlements, no easy escape. Weeks could pass without seeing another human face. During winter, rough seas often delayed supply runs, stretching isolation even further. For many, this solitude would have been unbearable. But the men stationed here were chosen specifically because they could endure it. James Ducat, the principal keeper, was a veteran of the Northern Lighthouse Board. Methodical and disciplined, he was known for his strict adherence to rules and schedules. The light, under his watch, would never be neglected. His personality matched the place, firm, unyielding, reliable. Thomas Marshall, the assistant keeper, was quieter but equally experienced. He kept meticulous records, noting changes in weather, wave height, wind direction, details most people would overlook. His handwriting filled the lighthouse logbooks with neat, orderly entries, evidence of a man who believed that control, however limited, could be maintained through observation. Donald MacArthur, the relief keeper, was different. A former sailor, he was known to be strong, capable, and occasionally temperamental. He had served on remote stations before and was no stranger to danger or loneliness. Though some described him as superstitious, he had proven himself competent and dependable when duty demanded it. Together, they formed a balanced team. On Eilean Mòr, their days followed a rigid rhythm designed to preserve both safety and sanity. Each morning began with inspections, checking the lantern, trimming wicks, cleaning lenses. Salt spray and soot accumulated quickly in this environment, and even a small lapse in maintenance could dim the light. Weather observations were recorded at regular intervals, sometimes hourly during storms. Meals were simple and shared. Conversation was limited, but not tense. These men understood the unspoken rules of isolation: respect routines, respect silence, and never let emotions disrupt the work. Outside, the island offered little variation. The wind rarely stopped. It screamed across the cliffs, rattling doors and windows, forcing its way into every crack and seam. At times, it was so strong that walking upright became difficult. Waves exploded against the rocks below, sending white plumes of water high into the air, sometimes high enough to reach areas far above sea level. Seabirds dominated the skies. Gannets, fulmars, and gulls nested along the cliffs, their calls echoing endlessly. To some, their presence was comforting, a reminder of life. To others, the constant noise felt like mockery, a reminder that the island belonged to nature alone. There were also ruins on Eilean Mòr. Long before the lighthouse was built, the island had been used sporadically by shepherds and monks. Low stone walls and crude shelters dotted parts of the landscape, remnants of people who had once tried to coexist with the island and eventually left. Local folklore claimed the Flannans were a place of spirits, avoided by fishermen unless absolutely necessary. Even the birds, some said, behaved strangely here. The keepers knew these stories. They heard them before arriving. They dismissed them as superstition. Professionals did not fear legends. Yet legends often arise from repetition, patterns observed and explained long before modern language gave them shape. At night, when the lighthouse beam swept across endless black water, the island felt especially small. The light moved in a steady rhythm, illuminating nothing but mist and waves. Beyond its reach lay absolute darkness. On those nights, the world seemed reduced to two elements: the fragile glow of human effort and the vast, indifferent sea surrounding it. And still, nothing about Eilean Mòr suggested imminent disaster. The island was harsh but familiar, dangerous but understood. The men were accustomed to storms, accustomed to isolation, accustomed to the slow erosion of time that defined lighthouse life. There were no signs of fear, no reports of unease, no indication that Eilean Mòr, silent, watchful, eternal, was about to claim something more than another broken wave. Yet this island, shaped by centuries of wind and water, had already outlasted countless visitors, and soon it would outlast 3 more. Because whatever happened next did not arrive with warning sirens or visible threats. It arrived quietly, and it began here, on an island that never cared who stood upon it. The discovery, December 26, 1900. The Atlantic was restless, even by winter standards. Heavy clouds pressed low against the horizon, and the sea rolled in long, dark swells that lifted and dropped the supply vessel with slow, deliberate force. The ship had made this journey before, bringing food, fuel, mail, and relief to the men stationed on Eilean Mòr. Nothing about the route was unfamiliar, yet something was wrong. As the vessel drew closer to the Flannan Isles, the captain raised his spyglass toward the cliffs. The lighthouse stood exactly where it should have been, pale against the gray sky, solid, unmoving. But the light was dark. This was not a minor oversight. The Eilean Mòr light was meant to burn continuously, a fixed point of certainty in dangerous waters. For it to be extinguished without explanation was unthinkable. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Mechanical failure was possible, but unlikely. Human error was even less so. The men assigned to that station did not make mistakes like that. As the ship slowed near the island, another detail became impossible to ignore. There was no sign of life. No keeper standing watch on the cliffs, no movement near the landing area, no signal flag raised to guide the approach. Normally, the arrival of the supply ship was anticipated. The keepers would signal, help guide the landing, and prepare to receive provisions. Even in rough weather, some acknowledgement was expected. This time, there was nothing. The ship's horn sounded, a long, echoing blast that carried across the rocks and vanished into the wind. The sound should have drawn someone out, even if only to confirm conditions were too dangerous to land. No response came. The captain ordered another blast. Still nothing. Reluctantly, a small group was assembled to go ashore. Among them was Joseph Mòr, a relief keeper familiar with lighthouse stations and their routines. If something had gone wrong, he would recognize it. Reaching the island was no easy task. Waves slammed against the landing platform, forcing the men to time their approach with precision. When they finally managed to step onto the slick stone, the sense of unease deepened immediately. The island felt abandoned. The wind cut sharply across the cliffs, but beneath it was a strange stillness, an absence that felt heavier than noise. As Mòr climbed the steep path toward the lighthouse complex, he noticed something that made him pause. The main gate was closed. That alone was unusual. Keepers typically left it open during daylight hours, especially on supply days. But more unsettling was what came next. The door to the lighthouse dwelling was shut. Mòr reached for it. Locked, not bolted from the outside, locked from within. He hesitated, then knocked. No answer. Calling out into the wind, Mòr shouted the names of the men, Ducat, Marshall, MacArthur, his voice echoing uselessly against stone walls and vanishing into open space. The island did not reply. Eventually, the door was forced open. Inside, the quarters were dim but orderly. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. Everything was exactly where it should have been, almost too perfect. The kitchen table stood set for a meal. Plates were laid out, cutlery neatly arranged. A pot sat nearby, as if recently used. Food remained on the table, not spoiled, not scattered, simply abandoned. It was as if the men had stood up in the middle of dinner and never returned. Mòr moved slowly through the rooms, his unease sharpening with every step. The beds were unmade, but not slept in. A chair lay slightly askew, as though someone had risen from it quickly, yet not in panic. There was no sign of a fight, no blood, no broken objects, no evidence of resistance. Then came another detail, small but deeply disturbing. 2 oilskins were missing. On Eilean Mòr, no keeper would ever venture outside without full protective gear. The weather could turn deadly in moments, and waves were known to surge far higher than expected. Yet 1 oilskin remained hanging inside. 3 men had gone out, only 2 had dressed for it. Why? As Mòr climbed the lighthouse tower itself, the feeling of wrongness intensified. The lantern room was spotless. The mechanism was intact. There was no damage, no sign of explosion or malfunction. The light had not failed. It had been extinguished deliberately. Someone had turned it off. Mòr descended, his thoughts racing, and found the logbooks. These were the heart of lighthouse life, daily records of weather, maintenance, and notable events. If something unusual had happened, it would be here. The final entries were troubling. Days before the disappearance, the logs described violent storms. winds stronger than anything the keepers had recorded before. One entry mentioned waves striking parts of the island previously believed unreachable. Another spoke of damage to equipment near the landing area. And then there were the words that stood out starkly against the professional tone of the logs. Mentions of fear, not vague discomfort, not fatigue, fear. One entry referred to Donald MacArthur, a seasoned sailor, as being uneasy. Another noted that all three men had been praying, something highly unusual for experienced keepers who prided themselves on composure and discipline. These were not men prone to panic, yet something had shaken them deeply. The final entry ended abruptly, no conclusion, no resolution, no explanation. It was as if the record itself had been interrupted, cut short in the middle of a story that would never be finished. Outside, Mòr and the crew searched the island. They scoured the cliffs, the paths, the landing area. They looked down into the crashing sea, hoping, dreading to see something. They found nothing. No bodies washed ashore. No clothing caught on rocks. No signs of a fall. Only damaged railings near the western landing, twisted metal bent by tremendous force, suggesting waves powerful enough to sweep a man away. But even that explanation felt incomplete. Three men did not vanish so cleanly. As the hours passed, the reality settled in. The lighthouse had been left unattended. The men were gone, and the island offered no answers. When Mòr returned to the supply ship, he reportedly refused to stay alone in the lighthouse that night. The light was relit, its beam once again cutting through the darkness, but the place no longer felt like a station of duty. It felt like a warning. The official reports would later conclude that the men had likely been swept away by a sudden, massive wave while attempting to secure equipment during the storm. It was a reasonable explanation, logical, orderly, comforting, but logic does not explain everything. It does not explain the locked door, the unfinished meal, the missing oilskins, the fear recorded in the logs, and it does not explain why, standing alone on Eilean Mòr, even hardened sailors felt the urge to leave as quickly as possible. The discovery answered one question. The keepers were gone. But it raised another, far more unsettling one. What could force three experienced men to abandon safety, routine, and reason and walk willingly into the storm? Theories. When the bodies were never found, speculation began immediately. The official inquiry closed quickly, but questions did not. Instead, they multiplied, spreading through maritime circles, newspapers, and coastal communities. Because when three experienced lighthouse keepers vanish without leaving a single physical trace, the sea does not keep its secrets quietly. Over the years, several theories emerged. Some were grounded in reason. Others drifted into fear, folklore, and obsession. Each attempted to explain the same impossible absence, and none could fully do so. Theory 1. The wave. The most widely accepted explanation was also the simplest. A wave. Not an ordinary one, but a sudden massive surge, what sailors sometimes call a rogue wave. These waves can rise without warning, far taller and more powerful than surrounding seas, capable of sweeping ships from decks and tearing steel from stone. The Flannan Isles were no strangers to violent water. Records confirm that storms battered Eilean Mòr in the days leading up to the disappearance. Railings near the western landing had been bent and torn loose, damage consistent with extreme wave impact. According to this theory, two of the keepers went outside to secure equipment or assess storm damage. Perhaps a crate had broken loose. Perhaps a rope had snapped. Perhaps protocol demanded immediate action. Then the wave struck. One man was taken instantly, dragged into the sea before he could react. Seeing this, the second keeper may have rushed forward, instinct overpowering reason. The third man, realizing something was terribly wrong, may have run outside without fully dressing, explaining the missing oilskins, and been caught moments later. 3 men, 1 disaster, no survivors. It is a clean explanation, logical, comforting, and yet incomplete. If the wave theory were entirely correct, certain details would not linger so uneasily. Why would all 3 men abandon the safety of the lighthouse during a storm violent enough to produce such waves? Lighthouse protocol emphasized caution above all else. Equipment could be replaced. Lives could not. And why extinguish the light? A keeper might leave briefly during a storm, but to leave the lantern unattended, to deliberately turn it off, violated every rule they lived by. The light was their responsibility, their purpose. For three disciplined men to neglect it simultaneously suggests something more than a routine emergency. Theory 2. The fall. A variation of the wave theory suggests a more gradual tragedy. Perhaps one man slipped while working near the cliffs, lost his footing on wet stone, and fell into the sea. Such accidents were tragically common in lighthouse service. The terrain was unforgiving, and a single mistake could be fatal. Hearing the cry, or seeing the fall, the second man may have rushed to help, knowing deep down it was already too late. The third followed, not because he believed he could save them, but because panic had replaced protocol. In this scenario, the lighthouse was abandoned not deliberately, but in a moment of human failure, a cascade of instinctive reactions that spiraled beyond control. But again, the theory falters. Experienced keepers were trained not to do this. They knew the sea claimed victims mercilessly. They knew that approaching the edge during a storm often meant adding another body to the count. And once more, the logs raised doubts. The men had recorded fear days before any supposed accident, not after, not during, before. Fear suggests anticipation, expectation, not surprise. Theory 3. The storm that shouldn't exist. Some investigators focused on the weather records themselves. The logs described storms of unusual intensity, winds stronger than any the keepers had previously encountered, waves reaching areas believed safe, equipment damaged at elevations previously untouched by the sea. Modern analysis suggests that under rare conditions, wind, tide, and current around the Flannan Isles could combine to produce localized chaos, storms that behave unpredictably, intensifying suddenly and violently. In this theory, the men were not reckless. They were overwhelmed. Perhaps the lighthouse itself began to feel unsafe. Vibrations, structural stress, the sense that the building might not hold. The men may have gone outside to assess damage, believing the danger inside was greater than the danger out. If so, their decision was not foolish, but tragically mistaken. Still, this explanation struggles with one central question. Why was the door locked from the inside? If the men left together in urgency or fear, why secure the building behind them? Locking the door suggests order, intent, a belief that they would return. That belief never came true. Theory 4. Madness on the rock. As official explanations failed to satisfy, darker ideas surfaced. Isolation has consequences. Lighthouse keepers lived cut off from the world for weeks at a time, surrounded by endless noise and emptiness. The human mind, deprived of variation and connection, can turn inward, sometimes dangerously so. According to this theory, one of the men, most often suspected to be Donald MacArthur, may have suffered a psychological break. Known to be superstitious, he may have interpreted storms, sounds, or shadows as signs of something threatening. If one man panicked, the others may have tried to restrain him. A struggle near the cliffs could have ended disastrously, or perhaps fear spread slowly, infecting all three men until rational thought collapsed entirely. Yet those who worked lighthouse service rejected this idea. Veteran keepers did not panic easily. They were selected precisely because they could endure isolation without losing stability. And no signs of violence were found inside the lighthouse. No broken furniture, no marks of restraint, no blood. Madness leaves traces. This disappearance did not. Theory 5. The unnamed fear. The most unsettling theories emerge not from evidence, but from what is missing. The logs, the mention of fear, the prayers. These details have fueled speculation for over a century. Some believe the men encountered something they could not explain, a phenomenon that shattered their sense of control. Strange sounds carried by the wind, movements in the fog, the feeling of being watched in a place where no one should be. The Flannan Isles were long avoided by locals. Folklore spoke of spirits, of presences that did not welcome human intrusion, birds behaving strangely, sounds echoing where no voice should be. To modern ears, such ideas sound irrational, and yet fear does not require logic to exist. If the men believed, truly believed, that something on the island threatened them, their actions may have followed a pattern outsiders could never reconstruct. People do not always run from danger. Sometimes they move toward it, trying to confront what terrifies them, hoping proximity will bring clarity or control. The sea, vast and final, may have seemed less frightening than whatever they felt closing in around them. Theory 6. Something between explanations. Perhaps the truth lies not in a single theory, but in fragments of many. A storm, fear, darkness, human error. The sea does not kill cleanly. It erases. It removes evidence. It removes certainty. It removes closure. 3 men may have faced a situation no manual prepared them for, an intersection of natural force and human limitation. They made decisions that seemed right in the moment and fatal in hindsight. Or perhaps they never had time to decide at all. Why the mystery endures. If bodies had been found, the story would have ended. If a clear accident had been documented, questions would have faded into history. But Eilean Mòr offered nothing. No remains, no final scene, no definitive truth. The lighthouse was relit. The service continued. Life moved on. Yet those who returned to the island reported an unease they could not explain. Some refused to stay alone. Others claimed the place felt altered, as if it remembered something they did not. The Flannan Isles remained where they always were, battered by wind and sea, indifferent to human curiosity. And the lighthouse still stands, a monument not only to navigation, but to absence. Because in the end, the most disturbing part of the mystery is not how the men died. It is how completely they vanished. 3 lives erased without struggle, without witnesses, without farewell. Only a locked door, an unfinished meal, and a question the sea refuses to answer. What happened to the lighthouse keepers of Eilean Mòr? Closing. In the weeks that followed the disappearance, the lighthouse on Eilean Mòr returned to its purpose. The lamp was cleaned, the mechanism repaired, the great lens turned once more, casting its steady beam across the Atlantic darkness. To passing ships, everything appeared normal again. A light in the distance, a promise of safety, a sign that someone, somewhere was keeping watch. But for those who knew the story, the island was never the same. The official investigation concluded quietly, offering an explanation that fit the known facts just well enough to be accepted. A storm, a wave, a tragic accident. The Northern Lighthouse Board recorded the incident, closed the files, and moved forward. Lighthouse service was dangerous work. Loss was not unheard of. And yet this loss felt different, because danger usually leaves evidence, and accidents usually leave remains. Here, there were none. The absence of the 3 men became the island's most defining feature. Visitors spoke of it not as a place where something happened, but as a place where something ended, abruptly and without resolution. The empty rooms, once filled with routine and quiet conversation, seemed to echo with questions no one could answer. Those who served on Eilean Mòr after 1900 reported an unease they struggled to describe. Some said it was simply the knowledge of what had happened there. Others insisted it was more than that. A feeling that lingered, especially at night, when the beam swept over endless water and returned to reveal nothing new. Several keepers refused to stay alone on the island. Others requested transfers after only short assignments. A few claimed the island felt as though it were listening. No official records mention these fears, but they were passed quietly, from keeper to keeper, like a warning not meant for paper. The lighthouse itself never spoke of the men who vanished. Stone does not remember. Metal does not grieve. The machinery turned as it always had, indifferent to human stories. And yet the light, unchanged in function, seemed altered in meaning. Before it had been a symbol of guidance. After, it became a reminder that even places designed for safety can become scenes of mystery, that even trained, disciplined men can vanish in ways no procedure accounts for. Over time, the story of the Flannan Isles keepers drifted into legend. Newspapers exaggerated details. Writers embroidered the facts. Poems were written, most famously one that spoke of an empty house, a meal left untouched, and a terror no one could name. Truth blurred with imagination, and still, the core facts remained stubbornly simple. 3 men were there. Then they were not. Nothing in the lighthouse logbook prepared the world for what followed. No final message, no desperate warning, no explanation written in haste. Just silence. Perhaps that is why the mystery endures. Human beings are uncomfortable with silence. We seek patterns, causes, conclusions. We want every story to end with understanding. When it does not, we return to it again and again, hoping repetition will reveal what logic cannot. The Flannan Isles do not offer that comfort. They stand as they always have, windswept, isolated, and unmoved by human curiosity. Storms still crash against their cliffs. Fog still rolls in without warning. The sea still takes what it wants, when it wants, without apology. And the lighthouse still shines. Each night, its beam sweeps over the same dark water the keepers once watched. It illuminates nothing but distance, never revealing what lies beneath the surface or what waits beyond the edge of sight. Some mysteries fade with time. This one does not. Because the question it asks is not only about how 3 men died, but about how fragile certainty truly is, about how quickly routine can collapse, about how little separates order from chaos when humans stand at the edge of forces far greater than themselves. Maybe the men were taken by a wave. Maybe fear led them into a fatal mistake. Maybe something occurred that language cannot fully describe. Or maybe the truth is simpler and far colder, that sometimes the sea does not rage. It does not announce itself. It simply opens, leaving no trace behind. The light on Eilean Mòr warns ships away from the rocks, but it offers no warning to those who keep it. And somewhere between the wind, the water, and the unanswered questions, the memory of 3 men remains, etched not into stone or metal, but into absence itself. The island kept its secret. The sea carried it away. And whatever happened on Eilean Mòr in December of 1900 never gave them back.
Shadows crawl where the light won't go. A silent wind, it starts to grow.